Hi there, it's John from Tutor to You. Welcome to the Economics Teachers Staffroom. In each episode we're going to consider a major topic facing economics teachers. We're going to ask our panel of experienced practitioners to give their advice and suggestions. Here we're going to discuss effective interventions for economics. Let's meet the panel.
Hello, my name's Isobel. I have been teaching AQA for the last 5 years and EdXL for the 4 years prior to that. For the first 5 years of my career, I also worked as a teacher of maths, so that's what I trained in, but my degree is in economics, and then slowly made the shift over to economics, which is where my true passion is.
Hi, I'm Helen Gordon. I'm head of department at a large sixth form college in Wigan.
So my name's Ruth Tarrant and I'm the subject lead in economics at Tutor to You, where I've been working pretty much full time for nearly 10 years. Over the course of my teaching career, which has spanned about 20 years now, I've taught all of the major awarding bodies, been a senior examiner at a number of them, and taught in a whole different range of educational institutions, from comprehensive schools, sixth form colleges, universities and independent schools.
What does intervention look like in your centre or department?
So we get a list of centrally identified students that are on an intervention register, which has a couple of layers to it. Now, that for me doesn't make an awful lot of difference, because often I'm looking at my own students and looking at their results and what they need individually, and I've got my own list. And the list of students who are on the school register are always already on my list, but often I have extras that I want to be keeping an eye on for one thing or another. It might be that their data looks fine, but I know that there's issues in certain areas that I want to be keeping an eye on. So some of that is managed across subjects. So if students have on intervention plans for lots of different subjects, obviously that requires a little bit of give and take between subjects. They can't be spending 3 hours on every subject every day. And so sometimes that does require us to chat with other departments, chat with their tutor, and work out exactly where economics fits within this broader plan. So it's useful to be able to be flexible at that point and to have ideas of things that are very intense, things that maybe they can do every day, or things that maybe that they may need to take a back seat on, or potentially that there's stuff that will help across all of their subjects, particularly if those are kind of literacy interventions and things like that. So that's generally how that works at my centre.
So at the moment I'm working with Tutor to You, but in the past when I've been teaching, my interventions have typically consisted of two main things. The first being invitations to join special timetabled lunchtime clinics, which have really been billed to students as a real positive rather than a punishment. I think that's really, really critical for intervention, as well as individualised, personalised homework. So it would be very, very rare that I would ask all students to do exactly the same thing in their independent learning time.
Obviously, intervention has to be tailor-made to the individual student. So, there are probably hundreds and hundreds of different interventions which occur in any one year in the department. But generally, interventions are done through one-to-ones, tutorials, where we may sit down with a student and maybe go through a topic again. We might get a group of students together, maybe students who are struggling, or students who are really flying high, and work with them in maybe small groups. We quite like doing that across the year group, particularly with the high achieving students, because we feel that provides them with a stronger springboard for them to work from. We often do that with Oxbridge students at the start of their first year, but also we'll work with students who aren't applying to Oxbridge later on in the year as well, in one-to-ones, to provide them with extra support.
How do you support and engage students who are finding the subject more challenging?
I think for me, it's really important to make sure I go through the diagnosis process properly and really work out exactly what the problem is. And that means that students often feel more seen and more understood if you can really delve down and properly understand why and where they're struggling, helps you to create a plan that they feel more safe in and more confident in, and have more trust in you. So I find that the key areas that will often need that kind of support is, first of all, is individual topic understanding. So it might be that they understand some areas but don't understand other areas, and that's quite simple to fix. And that will just be looking at that specific topic. There's also broader issues where they're struggling to put topics together, and that sometimes needs a different approach. Other things that the students might be struggling with that I kind of need to identify and diagnose. Sometimes the problem is with their recall, and that's stopping them being fluent enough in their answers. Sometimes the problem is that they don't know which skills to use at a given time. So they don't know which questions they need to show evaluation, which ones they don't. Sometimes it's having struggle with those specific skills. So it's working out whether they're having problems particularly with application or particularly with analysis. Sometimes there are problems with literacy more generally, and it's useful to be able to identify those problems, particularly issues with understanding the question. There are also sometimes issues specifically with their numeracy skills and being able to identify that. So I think being able to be really specific in where the students are struggling not only obviously makes them feel seen and makes the intervention feel worthwhile, but it also helps that level of trust.
Obviously, intervention occurs in class, so you might sit students closer to you, or you might actually sit them with another student who you think they'll work particularly well with. We found that to be really, really powerful, actually, really thinking about where students sit and sitting maybe weaker students with very strong students, particularly if the very strong student is actually really good at writing. We found that to be really, really helpful. The other thing that we've done is students who have struggled in the end of the lower sixth year have been invited to attend a lower sixth class in the second year. And this has been really, really powerful for some students. But you do need to take into account their other subjects, because sometimes when students have gone into a lower sixth class and an upper sixth class, the timetable has become too much. And often if the students are struggling in another subject area, it can mean that their timetables are far too over onerous and they actually start to fail worse than they were before. So whilst we do that and we do think it's powerful, I do think you need to really think about that. And finally, some of the most powerful interventions we've ever used in class is really getting students to think about how their own jobs or own businesses relate to the economics that we are learning. So I think back to a student that I taught a year ago who really struggled with understanding the application of economics until we spent quite a bit of time with him and allowed him to see that the businesses that he was running, that we could apply the theories to those businesses and actually draw the diagrams for those particular businesses, at which point he then just flew and in the end did really very well in the exam. But if you can do that with some students, that's very, very powerful.
I think low stake games and quizzes every lesson can really, really help here. So it's testing, but with a fun element. I also really like to always find out what sorts of things my students are into and linking examples and theory to their interests. That can be as small as someone that, I don't know, loves having jam and crumpets for breakfast and building in crumpets into your demand and supply diagrams. So it doesn't have to be anything big or clever, but little personal things can make a big difference. I think the key here is always connection before correction.
Are there any interventions that you've tried that you think are total winners or a total waste of time?
So I don't think any interventions are a total waste of time. I think that any time that you're looking to spend more time with students or working on some skills are going to benefit all students in some way and some students in significant ways. Ones that I think are really, really good are when students read another student's piece of work. We'll often get them to read a piece of work using different colour highlighters, picking out that PEE paragraph, point, evidence, explain. And then once they've read somebody else's work, what's really important is they do something then with that learning. So read somebody else's work, look at the piece of work that they've done and change their piece of work based on the really good piece of work. We find that very, very helpful. So what we try and do now is when we mark a piece of work, we always give it back with some feedback, get them to read another student's piece of work, and then get the students to rewrite what they had originally written, and under it to say what their own targets have been, what did they want to improve. Then they have a peer assessment done where their peer is then checking, have they achieved what the student wanted to achieve? And what can be very powerful is if you're asking a student, say, for example, to develop a chain of analysis, that they highlight where they think the chain of analysis has been developed, and then their peer looks at whether or not they agree, have they done that? So one of the best interventions we found is, reading other people's work and then the student doing something with their own work to improve it, and someone else checking to see whether or not the work has been improved. Use of highlighters also helps with this process and to make it far more efficient.
I think I've come on a bit of a journey with interventions, and I'm now at a point where I'm really happy with the way they work. And the lessons that I've learned are, first of all, to make sure that it matches the problem that the students had. If you go for a general solution to a specific problem, you're not going to get great results. And so students spending hours and hours recapping their subject, recapping their topic, going over their notes, watching videos, if that isn't where the problem lies and that solution doesn't fit that problem. We tell students that all the time when they're talking about their policies. The second thing I've learned is to be really, really specific with what you want them to do, and often putting that into a plan of this many hours on this day, or in this week I want you to do this and this and this and this. Sometimes our students that are struggling have maybe weaker executive functioning. Also, when students are feeling stressed, it is harder for them to work out what to do. So giving students a suggestion of you could do this or this or this or this can be really difficult for them to make a decision in that moment. What they need to be able to do is to sit down and tick it off like a homework, and feel like that they are progressing through something. So giving them either week by week or kind of at most fortnightly plans, I find is really useful, because I think they need to feel like this often this very big task that's in front of them feels small and manageable and feels like they're making progress through that. Some really useful interventions I found really depend on the problem. I've done a lot of work on introductions, for example, and helping students to write, going through what I feel a good introduction might look like, and then giving them a set of questions to research and revise, I guess. So you're going to be writing an introduction on this topic, so spend 15 minutes revising that. And then writing that. Other interventions that have been useful are conclusions, working on conclusions. And again, it's a very similar process, looking at all the building blocks that go into making good conclusions over the first couple of weeks, and then giving them examples of questions where I just want them to write the conclusion. So often I'll provide them with the rest of the answer, and then they just write the conclusion to that. But again, setting out into really specific activities. Other things that I find useful, if students are struggling to put ideas together and see the big picture, maybe they're getting bogged down in the details, is doing a kind of 25-minute review of all of year one micro, all of year one macro, and encouraging them to put that into a mind map of some description. If students are struggling with recall, I use 30-day recall challenges, which is where the flashcards for that section, so either the flashcards for year one micro or year one macro or year two micro, etc., are split up into 30 sections, and that gives them a little bit to do every day, and again makes it feel more manageable. They're getting through it. There are regular checkpoints where I can see if it's working. learning. I find that one really useful. And then there are kind of topic specific ones, and we all have our kind of go-to resources. But again, the key thing for me is making that a list of things that they can actively get through. The other thing that I found really helpful is to check at the end that intervention has been successful, and have some kind of output that you can monitor to say, actually, yeah, this has been good, they understand this, or maybe they need a bit more help. And so I think those are the key things for me, is making it specific to the problem. And then second of all, making sure that it's a really clear, obvious task for the students, so that they can get through that bit by bit and really feel like they're succeeding in that.
I'll start with the second half of that first. I think redoing work that you're not satisfied with for homework has just never been something that's worked for me. The reason I say that is that students often see it as a punishment. So getting them to redo something, it has never been something that I think has been effective. I would say don't underestimate the power of scaffolding and drilling the absolute basics for these students. There is a range of grades available for a reason. And for some students, the difference between a D and a C may simply be about getting better at the basics rather than worrying about whether they can do the more advanced topics. It can be getting them to think really strategically about how to approach the exam paper. I think, the simple things really are often the best. One of my most favourite teaching and pedagogy books is a little book. It's got a pale blue cover. It's called Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning. And it's just absolutely crammed full of really good ideas on things like knowledge retrieval, how it really helps students develop those sorts of essential skills. Don't underestimate the power of getting students to create flashcards and testing themselves. I think the key thing I'd say to all teachers here, regardless of the subject, is actually that you can't do all of the work for the students. If they really don't want to do it, all the intervention in the world isn't going to make a difference. But if they are motivated and they do want to get better, helping them with the strategies that they can deploy by themselves, for example, flashcards and testing, makes such a big difference.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Economics Teachers Staff Room.